Every year, at the beginning of spring, a low warbling call can often be heard in the evening, coming from the wooded area at the Taiwan Endemic Species Research Institute in Chi-Chi, Nantou County. Residents of the surrounding area were curious to know where the warbling sound was coming from. But the mystery was only solved when researchers at the institute investigated the area and discovered that the strange noise was made by a very rare member of the heron or Ardeidae family, the Malayan night heron. The Malayan night heron can mainly be found in the tropical and subtropical areas of southern Asia. The species has been sighted in southwest India, South China, the Indochina Peninsula, and the Philippines. As early as 1865, the British naturalist Robert Swinhoe, who was stationed in Taiwan as a diplomat, caught a couple of Malaysian night herons at Danshui in northern Taiwan and Kaohsiung in the south. Due to the rapid decline of the population, the status of this species has now become the issue of local and international ornithologists. The plumage of an adult is a deep reddish brown with a long crest of black feathers running from its head to the back, with a blue patch between its eyes and beak. Its breast is a pale creamy brown with dark vertical stripes running down to the ventral part. The subadults that have yet to reach maturity are gray in color and peppered with earth-brown stripes. Most members of the heron family live in groups. They feed mainly on fish, shrimp, and other aquatic animals, and are thus usually found near rivers, streams, ponds, and the coastal zones. On the contrary, the Malayan night heron dwells in dense forests and is a solitary bird. The Malayan night herons prey mainly on invertebrates, such as earthworms, which they can locate and peck out of the ground with great ease. When searching for food, the Malayan night heron is extremely cautious. Their main feeding behavior is to stand and wait, or slow walk, while the neck, which is bent into an S shape, sways from side to side. The bird can also be seen standing motionless, with its eyes fixed on the ground, as if listening to the sounds coming from under the ground. This pose is typical of Malayan night herons, as they are earthworm specialists. The heron walks slowly and unhurriedly, like a nobleman wearing a ceremonial hat. When startled, the bird expands its crest forward and stands completely motionless, allowing its earth-colored plumage to blend into the surrounding habitat. We know relatively little about the habits and breeding ecology of the Malayan night heron. To gain a greater understanding of this species, the Taiwan Endemic Species Research Institute ran a research project from 1992 to 2000. During this time, many nestlings that fell from their nests and any injured adults were brought to the Wildlife First Aid Station of the Institute. Some of these unfortunate victims survived after intensive care by the veterinarians. Once the chicks grew up, they were released. The ornithologists banded each bird with a colored plastic band and a numbered metal band before releasing it, so that the birds could be recognized if they were spotted again in the wild. In May 1998, Researchers were observing a pair of Malayan night herons in the wooded area within the grounds of the Institute and were surprised to notice that one of the birds had a blue band and white band on its left tarsus. They soon discovered that the heron they saw was in fact a former patient from the Wildlife First Aid Station in 1996. The bird got the nickname blue-white because of its colored bands. In order to monitor the nesting and breeding activities of blue-white and its partner, the researchers set up 24-hour surveillance cameras beside the nest. Naturally, the members of the Institute were excited to see what had become of blue-white. It had been nothing but a small bundle of feathers when the Wildlife First Aid Station first treated it. Now the little bird had returned as a full adult plumaged male. Along with its sub-adult mate, they built a nest to ensure a future generation at the Institute. It was not only a pleasant surprise for those members who treated it day and night a couple of years ago, but also provided great encouragement to the wildlife conservationists. Blue and White and its mate built their first nest in an Indian almond tree near the main building of the Institute. In May 1998, the female laid 3 eggs. The parents continuously took turns to incubate the eggs day and night. 1 month later, one by one, the 3 chicks hatched within a couple of days of each other. The newly hatched chicks were covered in fine white down with their eyes open. The parents cared for them intensively. While accepting food from a parent, the chicks would stretch out their necks and open their beaks to grab the food. With their straining necks and open mouths, the chicks looked quite adorable. Even though Blue-White and its mate struggled day and night to find enough food to feed the new hungry mouths, 7 days after hatching, the weakest chick died for no apparent reason. The dead chick was then pushed out of the nest by the parent birds. This was the harsh side of nature. Unfortunately, the shadow of death continued to linger around the nest. Just 1 day later, the second chick fell out of the nest. The last chick also fell from the nest after struggling to regurgitate an earthworm the following day. After watching all 3 chicks meet untimely deaths, Blue-White and its mate shouldered their grief and sorrowfully disappeared. In the following spring of 1999, Blue-White returned to the same breeding spot again. This time, he and his mate made their nest in a mahogany tree in the wooded area. To continue observing Blue-White's breeding activities, the researchers had to find a suitable location to set up a surveillance camera. With the help of tree climbing equipment, the researchers were able to set up their camera directly above the nest in an ideal location beside the mahogany tree. Due to high rainfall in the second year, Blue-White and his family had an ample supply of food. The breeding season started in May and lasted until September, which is the beginning of autumn. Blue-White and its mate finally raised 1 healthy fledgling, which left the nest to begin its own journey to adulthood. Encouraged by this successful experience, they immediately started the second clutch. 2 of the chicks grew well and were in good health. Right about the time for the nestlings to leave the nest, a very strong and destructive earthquake, with its epicenter in Chi-Chi, struck Taiwan on the morning of September 21st, 1999. The two fledglings managed to survive the disaster, and like the quake-stricken inhabitants of Chi-Chi, pulled themselves out of the devastation and bravely continued their lives. In the breeding season of 2000, blue-white returned to the same place with a mate banded as black-yellow, a female heron that was released in July 1997 by the Institute after receiving treatment at the Wildlife First Aid Station. With their similar backgrounds, blue-white and black-yellow became an excellent couple. To facilitate more thorough observation, researchers set up their monitoring equipment in advance. They also erected a scaffold on open ground next to the mahogany tree. The researchers were then able to climb right up to the platform with black camouflage netting so they could observe the birds without disturbing them. At first, blue-white and black-yellow always stretched out their necks in a constant state of watchfulness, suspiciously eyeing strange, spindly bamboo creatures that were emerging from the ground. Finally, the two nesting birds became more and more accustomed to the tower in front of them and no longer cared about the observers behind the black netting. Perhaps this was because the Malayan night herons need to focus all their energy on the chick-rearing activity that soon had to follow. As it wasn't the first time that blue-white built his nest in a mahogany tree, he needed no reminder that soon after spring began, the nest would lose the canopy cover of the deciduous mahogany. Without the valuable experience of the previous years, any other novice nest builder might easily have been startled when the dense covering of leaves surrounding the nest suddenly disappeared, leaving the nest bare and exposed on the branches. "30 days after egg-laying, the first chick emerged on April 20th. The parents became busy with the time-consuming work of caring for the next generation. During the 2-month period from egg-laying to fledgling, the parent birds exhaust themselves as they struggle to raise their chicks. They work day in and day out, searching for food to feed their young. Without a constant supply of nutritious food, the chicks in the nest wouldn't be able to grow to become healthy adults. When the mother bird, black-yellow, returned to the nest to take over the task of incubating the remaining eggs, she fed her chick with food stored in her crop. Feeding was the most important task of the parent during the incubation shift. Once all the chicks hatched, the parents coming back to the nest would regurgitate the food from its crop to feed the chicks. Food that has already been softened by the parent is more suitable for young chicks to swallow. Most carnivorous birds, like the Malayan night heron, feed their chicks with food that has already been pre-digested and then regurgitated. Many members of the heron family feed their infants and fledglings this way. After being relieved from his shift, Blue-White left the wooded area to take a rest for a while. He braved the heavy rain of an afternoon thunderstorm and flew to the open area of the Institute to forage for food. nature reserve area provides an abundance of food, such as flying insects and earthworms. Normally, the area is relatively undisturbed by human activities, and thus this area serves as a ready-made canteen designed especially for this ground-feeding species. One of Blue White's chicks was noticeably thinner and weaker than the others. So it was no surprise when after a few days, only 2 chicks were left on the nest. Both the chicks grew rapidly. "22 days after hatching, they were almost as big as the adults. But tragedy struck again, when one of the chicks appeared to have fallen out of the nest and was found on the ground. Only 1 out of 3 nestlings was able to survive to leave the nest in the end. After the chick had successfully fledged, Blue White immediately started to build a second nest not far from the first. Compared to the earlier nests, this nest was relatively simple and crude. Located low down on the lower branches of a mulberry tree, the nest was just next to the back window of the dormitory of one of the Institute's staff members. Blue White didn't seem to be affected by the comings and goings of the workmen from a construction site nearby. Black Yellow laid 3 eggs, from which 2 chicks hatched. The 2 chicks grew fast, and at 5 weeks after hatching, they were quite large and were old enough to fledge. But on August 22nd, Super Typhoon Billis hit Taiwan directly. One of the 2, which had been tagged with yellow and pink bands, did not survive. During the night of gale-force winds and torrential rain, Yellow Pink was blown out of the nest and its fragile life was cut short. The mortality rate of nestlings seems to be extremely high. The reasons for this are not quite sure at present. Researchers surmise that the high rate of mortality may be related to several factors. For instance, diet and climate, as well as a high rate of accidental death from falling out of the nest and human interference. There is a case at the Jiayi branch of the Taiwan Agriculture Research Institute in which a nest of Malayan night herons in a willow tree was knocked down by a torrential downpour into a pond just after the first egg was laid. Four days later, the pair built a nest at the same spot and again laid eggs in it. 4 chicks hatched a month later. Unfortunately, the nest was knocked down again before the nestlings were old enough to leave the nest. In addition to their low survival rate, the Malayan night heron is also threatened by the widespread destruction of the lowland forests. The continuous development of their habitat for human use means the threat to the survival of the Malayan night heron is even greater. Bird lovers are extremely worried about the prospects for the future existence of this species. Researchers have recently found the presence of Malayan night herons in some places not far from the centers of urban areas. This has surprised and delighted many bird watchers and ornithologists. For instance, the herons have been discovered in Taipei's botanical gardens. Also, nesting herons can be seen rearing their young at the Jiayi branch of the Taiwan Agriculture Research Institute, Jiayi Park, and other wooded areas not far from the highway. These discoveries provide us alternative ways to conserve the Malayan night herons. As most of the low-altitude forests and woodland areas have been almost completely exploited, shouldn't we try to take positive steps to create habitats suitable for the remaining wildlife within the urban and suburban areas already inhabited by humans? Let's try to coexist peacefully with wild creatures like the Malayan night heron. Most of the natural habitat of Malayan night herons in Taiwan has already been destroyed, and the species now faces a severe threat to its continued existence at a global level. The sighting of Malayan night herons in the parks and other vegetated areas in cities in Taiwan is something we should be delighted and be proud of. However, instead of just marveling over the glimpses of these beautiful and mysterious birds, the Taiwan Endemic Species Research Institute has been putting a lot of effort into the studying of the breeding ecology of Malayan night herons over the past few years. Only through extensive research and better understanding about this bird will we be able to ensure the continued survival of Malayan night herons like blue-white. Through the efforts of the Taiwan Endemic Species Research Institute and other conservationists, we hope that the wild population and released individuals of Malayan night herons can go on to raise healthy offspring for generations to come.